recorded. Ashley, we have Ashley Erickson from the MAPE staff here.
You should move over to there.
And
the sites can see you. That's
She'll
good,
be
right
recording
there.
this one as well. So if you missed our first one, it's available, and you can. Ashley, how do you
your recording was
access
good.
it?
Thank you.
You can just take it as a YouTube.
Yes, our YouTube channel is youtube.com/teammape, and all of our videos are accessible there.
Maybe we'll write that down a little bit later for the folks who are in Winona and Rochester and St. Cloud. Tonight we're going to explore FMLA. I hope you're all familiar with the topic. Has anyone here used it to represent members?
No.
Oh, yeah, we do.
Yep, used it.
Well, it's a tool in our toolbox, and it's one that we should use whenever possible. I personally have used it on several occasions. It's a good tool to have, flawed as it may be. It's available to us. Tonight, Kathy Fodness, one of our BAs, has agreed to lead our discussions and provide information. You have a copy of the contract with regard to FMLA. You have a handout, which is a cursory overview of it, but something that you can refer to. Like 2 different schools of thought on the subject. Kathy, you ready to get us going?
Sure.
Everybody's ready out there? And
Can we find out if people there can hear what we're saying?
Mankato, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
And I like this because you can't actually throw stuff at me. Those are my members.
Tell everybody
And then where's the other side?
That's Rochester, St. Cloud, Winona.
Rochester, okay. And Winona?
Yep, we can hear you, Winona.
Okay.
Cool.
Well,
You've got 2 people up in Ely too.
oh yeah, hi Ely. All right.
Ely.
So talk there, right?
Right.
Okay. So before we kind of talk about the nuts and bolts, when I met with Jamie, we kind of agreed that we would start out by talking about, kind of in general, what is the steward's role in FMLA? Because we don't oversee FMLA and we don't administer FMLA. So it's kind of like you want to be able to do so much, but then there's other people that should be carrying larger pieces of this, the experts, the ones that have to administer it. But it comes in a lot in the daily representational stuff we do. I mean, for the BAs, and I'm sure for the stewards, every time we see somebody faltering in performance, especially people who have been around for a long time, you know, one of the first questions we try to strategically ask them is, do you have any health issues? And nowadays, we are addressing a much bigger myriad of health issues in the workplace, I think. Because now we've got everything from adult ADA to some real mild forms of even autism or learning disabilities. But certainly for a lot of the regular chronic illnesses or accidents, you know, we find people having things like anxiety, attention deficit, again, those things that are causing them problems. So maybe we can later brainstorm a little bit about how to try and bring that up and get them to talk about it. But the other place that this comes in is, as a steward, I think all of us should at least know the internal process where we work. So if a member comes up to you and says, you know, I've got diabetes and, you know, I'm going to need some time off and I'm having trouble regulating it, or my son has asthma and I'm afraid I'm going to be missing so much time, or how do I do that family medical thing? You have the right, and we think the obligation, to know exactly how the process works in your agency, and therefore make sure it works without a hitch for our members. And I'll tell you something. Even though FMLA is a law, and even though ADA is a law, the American Disabilities Act, you will find that a lot of people in upper management are very intimidated by this stuff. And all of a sudden, when you start talking medical issues, there's doors that open. You can talk about accommodations, you can talk about a leave, you can talk about some changes. So never be intimidated, but also never try to do the end game on FMLA. Because really what we want you to be able to do is say to somebody, here's how it works at revenue. Here's the person that you go to for the forms, here's the confidentiality, here's what you don't tell your supervisor, and here's where to find the information. So why don't we start out by kind of taking a look. We brought 3 handouts today. We brought a handout of the Department of Labor guidebook because it just says things in a different way, and it's a kind of good document. And that anybody, any of our members can go on the website and get that. And then we actually printed out the contract, the state policy with the questions and answers. Because you can find everything right there, pretty near everything. But if you look on page 152 of the statewide policy, and this is taken verbatim out of the act, you'll see what kind of things initially fall under FMLA. And it's serious health condition. It means illness, injury, impairment, or physical or mental condition. And it does say mental. And again, we got a lot of that stuff that we start to identify in certain members that they really do need some help getting fixing some of those problems which lend itself to performance issues, which lend itself to being terminated. So if you're not talking to your employer about a mental health condition you have that's affecting your performance, at some point you're going to be terminated, and you can't say, oh yeah, but. You know, I should have told you this 3 years ago, but I never did. So you probably, everybody has a probably good feel about this, so I'm just going to gloss it over, and you guys stop and talk about any piece you want. So inpatient care, when you're hospitalized for an overnight stay, that's automatically FMLA. And again, it's you, your kids, your spouse, or your dependent parents. And we can talk about those definitions later.
Yeah, I mean, actually, for anybody that's been working there for a while, I don't see how they could get to the point where it could threaten their job without, I mean, unless they did something that was an immediate firing offense, you would have to have, you know, the reviews with the negative comments and stuff on them.
Yeah.
That would potentially cause a grievance or something anyway.
I think the business agents do see, and some of the stewards do see, people ignoring it.
Ignore it.
And sometimes, especially if it's a mental health condition, they're ashamed, they're embarrassed. And so, you know, I think we do see that.
Kathy, I have a question. The question is, can the people out there in Radio Land, can they hear when people out here are talking?
Andy, we can hear you.
Okay, because I have a very strong voice. Okay, so if we want to have conversation here, we'll all speak loud so people out there can hear us.
And where's the mic?
It's up there, I think.
There's one up there, there's also one on the front table, but the one on the front table is muted at the present time because.
Okay.
So, but there's nothing we can actually like pass around? Okay.
But
Yeah.
you'll repeat the questions
Yeah.
when they're, but you can't repeat the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right. So for those of you who just came, if you got the, welcome, and if you got the handouts, there's 3 different handouts. Did you guys have a chance to get those?
No, there's a couple.
All right, they're at the back table. One of them is a Department of Labor guidebook, which just gives you the information in a different format. And then the other one is out of your contract, the statewide FMLA policy with questions and answers. And then the American Disabilities Act, which we're just going to mention briefly. So, glad you guys could make it. So again, we're just kind of talking about the steward's role in FMLA, and I think everybody kind of agreed that the steward should understand the internal process for handling FMLA at your agency. So that if somebody has trouble, you can help them walk through it. You know who's dealing with FMLA. You know that the confidentiality is being kept where it is. We still have supervisors that are asking our members for, you know, specific medical information, and no, you give the doctor's notes right to me and things like that. So FMLA is also supposed to route that to one person who holds that confidential, or HR if that's applicable. So again, on 152, we're just kind of trying to review the general categories of FMLA. Again, illness, injury, impairment, or physical or mental condition, and that's where we started talking about. We do have members who may have mental health issues or physical health issues that you see coming up through progressive discipline, especially for performance. And we can brainstorm about how we look at dealing with those things, because I think there's a lot of good ways to deal with it. Again, inpatient care, overnight stay in a hospital, hospice, or residential facility, continuing treatment, and this is the first one, is something a lot of people forget, but it's a period of incapacity of more than 3 consecutive calendar days. So I think most of the agencies, if you've been gone more than 3 consecutive days, they will kick FMLA in. They will kick FMLA in automatically. Have you guys seen that to be true? All right, a lot of people nodding. Who said no?
I did, Rochester.
And what?
Winona would say no too.
Can you talk a little bit about that? You just, people more than 3 days, you just don't see management applying FMLA?
No, the member has to apply for the FMLA leave. Management does not automatically look for it. In fact, if you don't provide something from the doctor within X amount of days, they will refuse your FMLA.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
Winona also.
What was the comment?
That's how it works in Winona also.
Okay.
Same thing in Ely.
If I may, you're talking about overnight hospitalization. I didn't even know what the FMLA was. I stayed 3 nights in the hospital last summer, and no one told me I have to file for FMLA until like 3 weeks later when, my colleagues, and she told me, hey, did you file? And I was still at home. She said, no, I did not. So I have to go and do all the paperwork that she faxed and sent them to me. But no one from the office or anybody told me I have to do that.
Okay, that's interesting, because I know at Revenue, it's immediate, so. Teresa?
I was gonna say, I was in the hospital for a week a couple years ago, and they automatically did the paperwork.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you see,
I'm
we don't,
with the OET, I don't know, you mentioned something like Revenue, OET
Yeah.
has different philosophy. I don't know what department she is in.
well, the bottom line is, we don't really expect consistency out of the state, do
Well,
we?
yeah, Deed ends up applying it pretty much automatically too.
Yeah.
Because they did that to me when I was in the hospital. But, I mean, the real issue is, should they?
Well, and we'll talk about that later, but they certainly have the right to, under the act. If it clearly falls within one of the automatic triggers, they do have the right to apply FMLA. But we'll look at that, because it might change depending on what the issue is.
Well, I always had like tons of sick leave anyway, so I wouldn't care whether it was,
Right.
FMLA or non-FMLA.
Well, but remember-
Protect your insurance. It's really to protect your insurance. So you can have like tons of sick, but you don't want to like have a bad record saying you took a whole bunch of sick leave.
That's right. And, okay, maybe this is a good time to talk about that.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, the comment was made about, I've got a lot of sick time, so I'm not really concerned about FMLA. And then the woman in the back said, but it protects your job, it protects your health care. So let's talk about that for a minute. FMLA is written as an act without any pay provisions. In fact, it gives
Right.
your employer the right to apply policies. So we know with the state that the reason for FMLA is to protect your job and to protect your insurance, your health insurance. But we know that the pay issues are contractual, they're state law. So contractual, you can use sick for yourself, state law, your child. The contract even has, I think, 3 days up for dependent elder parents. But the thing that FMLA does is protects you for using that time against you in discipline. So even though you're using sick time, paid sick day, you know that doesn't necessarily protect you against discipline. But anything with FMLA on it, they cannot use to discipline you with. So that's another important part of it.
Can you use sick time and FMLA together?
Well, sick time, the agencies will make you exhaust your sick leave under FMLA. Vacation cannot be required. That, you have the choice of using. If you ask, they should let you. I've never seen them not let you. You can request to. And it even says that in the back, the question answers that are along with the state policy. Sick leave, they will require you to use, but vacation is your choice.
Okay, then, I suppose for me, the question is, okay, you've got so much sick leave, all right, and FMLA is like 12 weeks. I mean, if, a lot of people would have more than 12 weeks of sick leave built up, especially if it's been here 25, 30 years. All right, is this FMLA 12 weeks sort of together with sick leave, or is it in addition to sick leave?
No.
Because if I exhausted my sick leave,
Right.
I'd have like, be gone for like 6 months, and then would you get another 12 weeks? Or-
Think of it this way, FMLA, again, is written as an unpaid act. That gives you 12 weeks in a year for certain reasons. The way you get paid is on top of that, and it comes from the contract or state law. The contract obviously gives you sick leave, the state gives your child sick leave, and then the contract extends sick leave for elder parents under certain circumstances. Your employer, the state, if you're off on FMLA, they will and can require that you use your sick time until you exhaust it, if that happens. But they can't require you to use vacation. So let's talk about this also, because it comes into play here. One of the most vulnerable things about FMLA that members tend to forget, you have to work 1,250 hours in the preceding year to have FMLA in your current year. But if you have had a lot of FMLA in your previous year, you may not have worked enough hours to have FMLA in your current year. So we have people with very serious chronic illness, and all of a sudden they find out that they're not covered and they can't get FMLA again until they build up enough hours, 1,250. So, that can get kind of dicey. And anything outside of FMLA, let's say I'm in a horrible car accident and I exhaust my 12 weeks of FMLA in one fell swoop. Well, anything outside of that in my year, whether it's actually FMLA or not, because I've run out of it, anything above that, they will and can discipline me for. So, people that are on FMLA sometimes forget that the non-FMLA attendance issues are just numbers on a page that they certainly can be disciplined for. So,
I have two questions. As far as for the employee choice to use vacation, I thought that in our agency that they told us that it was their choice whether they could make us use our vacation or not. Is that true?
well, I spoke directly to Carolyn Trevis at MMB, and she confirmed what the business agents were talking about that day, which is we cannot require, but the employee may ask to use it. And I said, do the agencies allow them to? And she said, as far as MMB is concerned, they should.
Can we get that in writing someplace?
If you can let me what agency is denying that, then I can work with the business.
They're not denying it, they're requiring it. They're requiring you to use both your sick leave and exhaust your vacation time.
Okay, well, one of the places you can start is back in the question and answer. Let me show this to you so you know where it is. We are always on guard for that, because that's why we called Carolyn to just confirm it, because we hear often that the agencies are doing that. Let me see.
And that's fine, if I could give it at some point in time, I don't want to stop you, but the other thing is you said in the preceding year. So is it in a 12-month period? Is it a calendar year? Is it a state fiscal year? What is that?
Calendar year. It's a calendar year.
Thank you.
Can you repeat the questions?
Yeah, if I can keep up with them. Let me take the first one before I go to the next one. On page 161, you'll see that there's number 11, is an employee required to use paid sick leave? Yes. And the very next question, are there circumstances under which an employee may request to receive paid vacation or comp time in conjunction with FMLA? An employee may request and receive paid vacation. MMB wrote these questions and answers as a guideline for their own policy. So if you need anything more than that, you can either contact your business agent or myself, and I'll get it to the business agent.
Thank you.
All right, so the statewide policy on page 148 says every fiscal year, the state of Minnesota will provide up to 12 weeks of job-protected leave. So how many of you people, you stewards, think that your agencies go calendar for FMLA? Anybody know?
I know that Winona State goes fiscal year.
Yep.
I thought that they, on an individual basis, they would look at somebody and say, okay, you're starting now, here's your year starts now, and then it will end exactly 365 days from now. And for somebody else, their year could start a different time.
Any other answer on that?
Well, I know at the end of fiscal year, they all get wiped out. Every single FMLA gets wiped out. And then if you have the 1250 hours, then beginning the fiscal year, you will get another 480. But if you don't, then you have to wait.
And who else, who was that, Ely, or Ely, were you adding comments?
I know we have to reapply every fiscal year, but the 12-month thing in collections anyways, they decided to do the previous 12 months. So if I apply for it in May, they look for the previous 12 months of May, the year before.
All right, let's keep going, and that is addressed further in questions, but I think what the last comment is really says it correctly both ways. That the state does look at the policy on a fiscal basis, but for your FMLA, it does start with the first occurrence of that FMLA event. So that fleshes out a little later. Let's keep going with the basics, reasons for FMLA on 152. Continuing treatment, it also talks about subsequent treatment relating to the same condition. Treatment 2 or more times within 30 days, treatment by a healthcare provider on at least one occasion, which results in a regimen of continuing treatment. So there's the, physical therapy that might come out of a car accident, follow up to a cancer illness, things like that. And pregnancy, I think everybody knows that that's kind of a given. The chronic serious health conditions is where a term in FMLA comes in that you really should be familiar with, and that's intermittent. So a lot of people think about FMLA as to do with a pregnancy or a car accident, something where I'm gone like 2 months. But intermittent means every so often. So again, if my child has allergies or asthma, I want to talk to my doctor about whether I should have my child under FMLA. And then any absent day that I have at work that I report as FMLA, and I've already gotten the documentation to the FMLA person, and it's been approved, that is going to be covered under your FMLA for up to 12 weeks, and you can't be disciplined. So if you're a diabetic, if you've got, like I said, anxiety, anything that may cause you to be absent from work, you should think about talking to your doctor and getting the FMLA forms. Because intermittently, as you may be gone because of that chronic illness, and you report it as such, and your paperwork is in, they cannot use that to discipline you.
So they cannot then count any sick leave that you take as FMLA unless you tell them that that was specific to your FMLA event?
If you don't tell them, and this can be told to a supervisor because it's not giving real medical information, if you don't say my absence today is FMLA related, then they don't know that it is, and therefore they're not going to just count it as FMLA.
Well, they did.
Well,
everything they were counting. So that's why I'm kind of.
But they
asking.
probably knew, I don't know how much they knew about your FMLA reason. Was it, you know, if it came out of that you were having treatment or a follow-up from hospitalization or something? Was it intermittent for a chronic illness?
It's been so many years that I think that the policy has been interpreted depending on who's at the agency. I don't know if you've found the same thing, Teresa?
Actually, I found them to be really good to work with.
Okay.
And I was gonna say, I know of at least one instance where HR was willing to do a retroactive FMLA to help somebody out because they were looking at discipline for an incident, and they said, well, if it becomes a problem, we'll do a retroactive FMLA to cover something that happened in the past.
And
We have a really good relationship with our HR people.
And the act itself isn't retroactive, but I mean, like we were talking about earlier, that's how nervous they get about this stuff. You know, we've argued retroactivity in a grievance. It's not guaranteed, but again, it's surprising how flexible they become when you're talking about an issue dealing with a medical reason. So again, the chronic serious health issue, if you've got the paperwork done, then you don't have to worry about those days when you need to be gone for it. But you certainly, most times that I've found, have to tell them that it's FMLA related absence. And then on the next page, you see again the multiple treatments. So we see that a lot. There it gives the example of, you know, cancer treatment, dialysis, certainly physical therapy coming out of an accident. And then we have a couple specific exclusions, and those are some of the routine stuff that we hear agencies saying that they won't give you sick time for a medical appointment. Sometimes it comes up when you've shared information that you have a routine physical, so they don't consider you actually sick.
Do we have to have the FMLA paperwork put in for the chronic illness?
Repeat the question.
The question was, do you have to have the FMLA paperwork turned in for a chronic illness? Well, you can certainly do that as you're having an absenteeism, and you know, just because you're absent, you're doing the paperwork. But it's a good, I usually tell people, if you've got a chronic illness that you know is going to cause you to be absent from work, there's no reason why you can't get the paperwork done, and that, you know, kind of gives you a safety net. And the FMLA person at your agency knows that this is going to be happening.
Right. The reason I ask is that because I do have a chronic illness, and I do take frequent time off for illness, but my bosses never said anything about it. They knew about it. They just, when I'm off, they know why I'm off. They never, and I don't remember ever having to fill out any FMLA.
Okay, and the comments are just about being gone from work without the paperwork being done, and it seems to be acceptable. Well, again, I mean, you're experiencing something that some of our other members don't, which is, I don't know what your absenteeism numbers are at. But, you know, certainly at the time that somebody says, oh, your numbers are getting high, that is the time that you really do need to think about doing FMLA if you're not going to do it now. Because if you're gone intermittently with a chronic illness, it's not going to affect your health insurance per se, and it's not going to affect your job security, but it will drive your numbers up to the point where you'll start getting conversations about possible discipline because of your absenteeism. Going on page 153, and there's a certain amount of language in this regarding people in the service, so you can review that. Talks about under the act who a son or daughter is, and so it certainly is inclusive of many different types of parent-child relationships.
Can I add something there?
Absolutely, please do, Teresa.
In addition to son or daughter, if it's a grandchild, and because of something your son or daughter has done medically, and you then take responsibility for your grandchild, they also come under that.
That's right, and that is covered, that is called locum parentis. And that is when you actually have guardianship over a child because of certain factors. And that's, I've also seen the agencies be very flexible with that, like they don't ask for any court papers. So again, this medical stuff, we find them extremely, usually okay to work with.
Did you say extremely, usually okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think you kind of understood what I meant, right? Okay. Because usually they're,
you come from.
Yeah.
because usually they're not.
Yeah.
How about that? Okay, and then you'll see on that page, it goes into the definition of spouse and also unable to perform the functions of the position. And this is where it goes into the American Disabilities Act, and we're going to be talking about that. So if you don't know your internal process for FMLA, it's a great thing to put on a meet and confer, or just to meet with HR. What's your process? What do people go through when they have an FMLA issue? You should know who the person is at your agency that handles the paperwork and who the employee is going to be working with. I think that's really helpful. So on 154, it goes on to talk about eligibility, and this is where you must have worked for the state of Minnesota for at least 12 months, needs not be consecutive, and then it does give you a rule for military service. And there's the 1,250 hours during the 12 months immediately preceding the request. And the Fair Labor Standards Act requires employers to count hours of work only, not paid time off. And again, the previous 1,250, if they've had FMLA during that year, they may in fact not have enough hours to be eligible in their current year. So again, it kind of goes through the litany of reasons for taking it: birth, placement of a child for adoption or foster care, to care for the spouse, son or daughter, or parent with serious health condition. And you can see, and just give you a minute to go through that list and see if there's any discussion items. Or any comments by anybody?
Who gets to decide whether a particular period of leave of 2 or 3 days falls within FMLA or outside of it?
You mean as far as the time or the reason?
I mean, actually, it would be the reason, because a person can have a chronic illness or something, and then they get the flu, which has nothing to do with their chronic illness.
Well,
all right? So if they were out for 3 days, is that with the flu, you know, and they didn't want that to go against FMLA time for one reason or other, who gets to make that decision?
well, you know, really, in a way, it's your doctor, but they have to have documentation for a valid FMLA claim. So if I'm gone for 3 days for flu instead of my asthma, and my supervisor says, well, we're going to make you take FMLA, then you need to contact a steward or your BA or whoever, because you would have paperwork to prove that you have an FMLA condition. So you don't have any paperwork covering those 3 days. I guess I think I'm answering your question. You're not claiming FMLA.
Right.
So if they say, well, we know you were out because of your asthma, and you say, no, I wasn't, that would be a pretty interesting situation. I've never seen that come up.
Yeah.
Andy and then Teresa.
So the flip side of that question is, you want to use FMLA and they say no. What's the procedure for adjudicating that?
Well, certainly it's your doctor that fills out the FMLA forms. We have filed FMLA grievances. I can think of one where an employee had been covered under FMLA, approved for years before, and then all of a sudden he was being kind of looked at for his absenteeism, and then actually his next round of certification for FMLA was questioned by HR, and they pushed it to the point where they made him go to the third step, which is supposed to be a provider that the two parties agree to. But our member agreed to go to their doctor, who was a specialist, and denied the FMLA.
The doctor denied it?
The doctor,
Oh.
their doctor,
Oh.
yeah. So, and we were definitely vehemently pushing him to get a provider that both parties agreed to, but he absolutely was not interested in doing that. So, you know, again, there's different ways to fight it, and we can certainly help in that, but the doctor is where it starts with the validation on the paperwork. Teresa?
I was gonna say, I've known members that have had, like 2 and 3 FMLAs for 2 and 3 different specific issues. But they have one for, like, say, asthma, another for another issue, and then another for something else, and then
Yeah.
are covered for, because they won't, it's issue specific, I believe.
Well, and kids, you know, kids, yourself, your spouse, you might have a number of things documented. So if we look on 155, it kind of talks about the employer's response to the employee's request. I think this is just good to review. It says that either when an employee requests or when the employer acquires knowledge. So again, there's that 2 ways. I can request it, and my employer can also award or assign FMLA to me if they know it's obviously an eligible incident. Each time an eligibility notice is given, the employer must provide the employee with the following: a notice describing the employee's obligations and explaining the consequences of a failure to meet the obligations. I'm not sure I know many people that have seen that. And this is another reason why it's really good to understand the internal process and where these things, who's supposed to be giving these forms and this information. The leave will be counted against the employee's 12 weeks of FMLA leave. Any certification requirements, the employee's right to use paid leave, whether the employer requires the substitution of paid leaves. Requirements concerning payment of health insurance premiums, because under certain FMLA leaves, you would be open to receiving a COBRA notice if you've been out long enough to jeopardize, or no, you wouldn't, I'm sorry. You would get a notice of your continuing health care. Am I missing something on that?
No, that's.
Joni, help me out.
Depends on how long they're out.
Yeah, because if you run out of paid, thank you. If you run out of paid sick leave and you're still on FMLA and you're on unpaid FMLA, thank you, Ms. Getter, you would be possibly open to a COBRA notice if you've been out long enough to.
Can you say what COBRA notice means?
That's the continued insurance that they offer that you have to pay yourself.
So you would get kicked off the normal insurance, but you could continue paying it yourself.
Right, and you would be paying the premium. You would be paying the cost of the health insurance. So as long as you're using paid time off, your insurance continues. But
I have a comment on that if I could. This is Amy up in Ely, and I know like when I've used it in the past, my health insurance premium stayed the same for my 12 weeks of leave. And then after that 12 weeks is when I was notified of the COBRA. That's I'd have to pay the full premium in order to continue insurance.
and that's right. I'm just trying to find because the 12 weeks of FMLA, thank you, Amy, the 12 weeks of FMLA is what's protecting your insurance, health insurance. Any other comments on that?
So that's an important point. Could you just kind of repeat
Well,
that?
I want to find the part in this that addresses it specifically. If you go on to page 155, and if we look at number 6, the employee's potential liability for payment of health insurance premiums paid by the employer during FMLA leave if the employee fails to return to work after taking the leave. The employee's rights to maintenance of benefits and restoration to the same or an equivalent job upon return. Let me see. let's find the specific part that talks about this so we can read it right from the policy. On page 157, job benefits and protection. During an FMLA qualifying leave, the employee and dependent health and dental insurance is maintained on the same basis as coverage would have been provided if the employee had been continuously employed during the entire leave period. So that clears it up.
Well, you would only get one of the COBRA notices though if you didn't return to work.
Well, or if you ran out of FMLA, like I think Teresa and Joni mentioned. But during the FMLA, you'd be safe.
No matter what your status, paid or non-paid.
Right, because the FMLA would protect your insurance, would protect your health insurance.
I assume too that the vacation donation program that the state runs, if somebody qualifies for that and they run out of their sick leave and they're at the end of the 12 weeks FMLA allows, that can also continue their, that also continues their healthcare benefits. If they're getting that, right?
Because they would be getting paid leave.
In paid status.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the employer or the state is also able to request refreshed documentation for somebody that's on FMLA. And we have situations where they ask the employee like every week or every 2 weeks. The general rule of thumb is documentation needs to be refreshed every 3 months, or that's a reasonable amount of time that somebody can have their employer say to them, we'd like to have a refreshed set of documents from your doctor. But anything really where they're asking 1 week, 2 weeks, we would say that's not reasonable, and in fact we would say that's harassing. So they do have the right to ask for new documentation, but it should be on a reasonable basis, which is generally looked at as every 3 months for things like chronic illness.
Question?
Yes, go ahead.
Under C, when it talks about.
What page are you on?
155, C, and when the employer issues an eligibility notice, that notice, I'm assuming, takes the form of a letter or an email and must include these 8 pieces of information in every notice. Is that right?
Yeah, I've never seen it in an email. What I've seen from the agencies I've dealt with is they all have forms. It's the FMLA forms, and it includes that information on it. Is that what you guys have seen?
I've gotten a letter.
You've gotten a letter, okay.
I got a letter from them saying this was FMLA stuff. But I've never had them request anything. I mean, they put me out it themselves and they never re-requested any kind of documentation at all.
Well, that's, again, just goes to show you that there's a lot of different experiences out there.
Yeah.
I think it would be good if we can jump to 159 and take a look at their frequently asked questions, because they really are. And this is really the place, if you've got a member coming to you asking you about FMLA, there's a good chance that their questions are in here because they've really covered the full gambit. Number 1 talks about eligibility. And again, if you remember, I'd always remind the employer or member that, again, the 1,250 hours in the preceding year has to be met for them to have FMLA in their career. So we certainly see people that become vulnerable because they had a rough year the preceding year.
And again, did we decide, is there a hard and fast rule what that year looks like? Is it January to January officially? Could it be anything they want?
I believe it's fiscal.
What does fiscal mean? I mean July 1st to July 1st? Okay.
I've had HR send out reminder notices.
Say that again?
I've had HR send out a reminder notice.
What's the first, you said you've seen that? You've heard?
I have gotten reminder notices from HR to renew the FMLA at the end of the fiscal year.
Number 4, as Joni holds up these 4 fingers. How much time may an employee take as FMLA qualifying leave? Eligible employees may take up to 12 work weeks of leave during each fiscal year. And there's some exceptions, but that's the general rule of thumb, so it's fiscal.
You can take the leave, but being eligible for it is 12 months prior to you put in for that event, right? For example, I put something in May, it's the 12 months prior to when I put in the event.
That's right, and that might have been the kind of dual issue we had before. Your FMLA year is fiscal, but say that again, from the date that you take your leave,
Eligibility.
they'll look at the preceding 12
Eligibility
months.
is 12 months prior.
Was that Ely?
Yep.
Very good, Ely.
We're very well versed in that up here.
I know, you certainly are. I think Joni and I know that. So let's keep going on the questions. Number 2, are only permanent employees eligible? No non-permanent employees are eligible if they meet the requirements stated under question number 1 above. Under what circumstances? There you have the list of circumstances again. There you have number 4, which we just looked at. Number 5, how much time may an employee take as FMLA qualifying leave to care for a covered service member? Again, there is a lot of stuff in this act about people in the service. If both husband and wife are state employees, are they both eligible for 12 weeks? Yes, however, a husband and wife may take only a combined total of 12 weeks for FMLA qualifying leave per fiscal year, and then you see A through D. And that, we actually really do periodically get that question asked, is can we both have 12 weeks, especially for A, we certainly have seen that come up a number of times. Can we both have 12 weeks?
And what is A? Because we don't have the handouts here.
Oh, I'm sorry. You can take only a combined total of 12 weeks for the birth of a son or daughter or to care for the newborn, for placement of a child with the employee for adoption or foster care, to care for the employee's parent, not parent-in-law, who has a serious health condition, because of a qualifying exigency arising out of the fact that the employee's spouse, son, daughter, or parent is covered military member on active duty. So, and again, I'm sorry, I thought we sent these out, but it is at the back of your contract. So again, if husband and wife have a child, they are not both, if they both work for the state, they're not both eligible to take the full 12 weeks. And then the next one, if both husband and wife are state employees, are they both eligible for 26 weeks of FMLA qualifying leave to care for a covered service? Do you guys have a good example back there? Oh.
Would you like to share with the rest of the class?
Yes, I said that's the first time I've seen people getting penalized for being married. Usually there's still 2 separate employees, so why would they have to combine their FMLA because they had a baby? There's still 2 separate people.
That's kind of the bigger question that I'm not sure. Number 7, again, if both husband and wife are state employees, are they both eligible for 26 weeks of FMLA qualifying leave to care for a covered service member who becomes ill or is injured, active duty again? Number 8, if an employee uses 12 weeks of FMLA qualifying leave in one fiscal year, are they allowed another 12 weeks in the following fiscal year for the same condition? And that's absolutely yes, provided they've met that 1,250-hour criteria. If FMLA qualifying leave is taken for the birth or adoption placement, must the leave be completed within a specific period of time? And the answer is, although it is possible that an employee could qualify for 2 separate qualifying leaves, all FMLA qualifying leaves must be completed within the 12 months. Number 10 simply addresses the intermittent issue, which we talked about before. 11 and 12 are the sick leave vacation questions. 13 talks about prorating for part-time employees. 14 talks about can an appointing authority determine if a request for leave is an FMLA qualifying leave? And this kind of goes to maybe what you brought up before. An employee requesting leave shall be asked the question, is the request for paid or unpaid time off for the purpose of an FMLA qualifying event? Yes, no. An employee giving notice of the need for FMLA leave must explain the reasons for the needed leave so as to allow the appointing authority to determine whether it is qualifying. And then B talks about if an employee requests a leave prior to completing a request for leave slip, a supervisor may ask the reason for the leave. The supervisor will ask for this information solely for the purpose of determining whether the leave is FMLA qualifying. And to be honest with you, we don't usually agree that supervisors have the right to have those discussions about specific medical conditions. So just giving them enough information to know that it's an FMLA sometimes is what will trigger the supervisor to direct the employee to HR or the person that will give them the FMLA forms.
So could you go into that a little bit as far as for if there's an employee with excessive absence? Then the supervisor say something to the employee about, you know, I'm not sure, and I don't know what kind of reasons that have been given, but if they're medical in nature, would it be right for the supervisor or wrong or not, you know?
Well, it certainly would be right for the supervisor to say, if you're having FMLA issues, let me tell you who you need to talk to. And we certainly have conversations between our members and their supervisors that surround that. Some of our members feel comfortable in giving more specific health reasons or health conversations with their supervisor, and some don't. But they certainly are not obligated to. But, you know, I think generally we think it's a good idea if a supervisor is tuned in at least enough to say, if you have this, in the same way a steward may say, if you are struggling with medical conditions that may be FMLA, let me tell you where you can go to get the paperwork.
Because I know, you know, peers are very upset because certain employees are gone an extended period of time or they're given different benefits that other employees aren't. And so it kind of pushes, you know.
And when you say different benefits, what do you mean by that?
Well, allowed to work at home and, you know, cover the time that they were away from the office that way, whereas.
And that's when it's really important as a steward to make sure you keep that confidentiality and kind of get savvy about trying to say, you know, has anybody had experience with that before I offer an answer? Have any of the stewards had an experience with employees who are angry because somebody may be gone from work a lot or be able to work from home through an accommodation or anything like that? Has anybody?
I've got in my own personal right now. There's another employee though, her husband is, has a medical condition, and, they have bent over backwards to help her, but for me, I'm giving discipline now for my issue.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Well, when somebody takes FMLA for pregnancy, oftentimes the employer offers no additional help for that position. So you get people that are just upset in general. They certainly support the employee and pregnancy, but they're mad at the employer.
Yeah. We end up having a lot of discussions, I think, about work coverage for people who legitimately are gone under FMLA. And, you know, it's just a topic I think we have to keep problem solving and talking about because, you know, they're not going to bring somebody in typically temporary for 2-3 months even. I don't see them doing that very often. Do you guys? So it does really get a, you know, kind of a two-sided coin of both supporting and protecting that member's rights and also trying to get the workload somehow divvied out or covered. You know, we still have a lot of members who, if they're gone for a limited amount of time, of course their work doesn't get doled out, they come back to it. But certainly if there's going to be somebody out for, let's say, 3 months, that the more proactive you can have those conversations in setting up who's going to handle the work, the better. because it tends to not be dealt with by management until kind of like a week later when the work hasn't been being done. So I guess I would certainly invite you to be as proactive about that as you can, talking about the work. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Well, there seems to be a great deal of difference between the agencies about working from home anyway. Because a lot of them, like MNIT, the central office, that's all kinds of people work from home. But the various agencies are really quite different about it. I mean, Lead hardly lets anybody work from home. There's a few of them. But
Well, aside from an accommodation,
Yeah.
the ability to telecommute or work from home or
Right.
work flex schedules is, the agencies aren't consistent and we don't see a lot of open doors. But when it's tied to a discussion like an accommodation, then all of a sudden you see some things changing. We had a gal at Revenue who had knee surgery and was having to drive in their office kind of on the out metro area closed. So she had to start driving into downtown Revenue in St. Paul. And it started to cause injury to her knee that she had just had surgery on. So we actually were able to get an accommodation for her to work at home. But we had to go to HR because she got denied by her supervisor, she got denied by the manager. And do you know that after it was approved, they had the gall to ask her to drive into St. Paul to get her computer to work at home. We said, she just gave you documentation that said her surgery was very much damaged by, and you want her to
drive in, yeah.
So, all right. Let's go on with this, and I know we want to have a little discussion about ADA quick, and then maybe just some questions, answers, discussion kinds of things. I think we're on 15, and again, that's pretty much talking about knowing your internal process. How can an employee determine if his or her request for time off qualifies under FMLA? The notice that has to legally be posted in the workplace explains the Act's provision and providing information concerning the procedures for filing complaints. An employee may ask his or her supervisor to contact the personnel office or their union to ask questions concerning the employee's rights and responsibilities. So again, if somebody is having trouble working through the FMLA process that we should be familiar with, we certainly can help them. And we certainly have filed grievances on the FMLA process itself. Can an FMLA qualifying leave extend an employee's period of employment? No. What are an employee's job protection rights upon return from an unpaid FMLA? An eligible employee shall be restored to the same position that the employee held when the FMLA qualifying leave began, or to an equivalent position. And that happens. That has happened. Certainly at Revenue, for instance, where we have RCO3s. The person may not come back to their exact desk. 9 times out of 10 that happens.
Can they send them up to Ely?
No. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with Ely. But no, that would be
So there's a
outside
35 mile?
Well, I don't think I could probably speak for the business agents, we don't see people not coming back to their site, but it might not be to their exact desk. I think that's typically the example that we see, if there's any change at all. If there's any change at all.
Could it be to some other site?
That would be a transfer, and within 35, the employer would have the right, but I think we would challenge that under FMLA. I think we would say that's almost punitive. Anybody have any other comments on that? I don't believe we've ever seen that happen. All right, and then 18 talks about how the FMLA leave coordinates with the statewide sick leave policy. And 19 talks about choosing whether or not they want to use FMLA. And the answer is no, it is the employer's responsibility to designate. An employee may not choose whether leave shall be counted as FMLA. But I think from our discussion, you already have seen that there's different experiences with whether the agency may designate it or just wait until somebody happens to request it. I don't know how are we doing for time?
Oh, we got, yep, plenty of time.
Okay, so let's keep going. There's a couple sheets of questions up, and then, again, we'll talk about ADA just a little bit. How can an employer verify an employee's need for leave? And, I mean, again, this is based only on information received from the employer, the employee's spokesperson. An employer may also require an employee to obtain certification from the employee's healthcare provider. I think that's every time they request that. The employer can pay for a second opinion if it doubts the validity of the original certification. That's what happened in the example I gave you before. If the second opinion conflicts with the first, the employer may pay for a third. The provider of the third opinion must be jointly approved by the employer and the employee, and the third opinion is final. So if you actually see somebody going down this road, please remind them that the third step, they need to have a provider that they both agree on. And if they're going that far down the FMLA path, then they should be working with a steward or their business agent so that we can support them. Because by then, I'm sure they're pretty frustrated. Number 21, Dan.
One thing on that too is I mean, with that case, we found out most physicians will not be a third opinion on an FMLA case. It's very hard to find one that will do it. That was one of the issues. The state required that it be a specialist, and then it was a specialist, but it wasn't even a specialist in what the person had. And then they sent him to a third party who also wasn't a specialist in what they had. And then they required that he take some sort of x-ray before they'd even give an opinion. He refused to take the x-ray unless the state would pay for it. And so they said, well, then I deny it.
Right, which they did.
Yeah.
So we were much more interested in fighting that, I think, definitely than he was. So.
Yeah. Well, no, he's gone to the Department of Labor.
Oh, he has?
Yeah, that's what he's supposed to have done.
Yeah.
He's talking with a lawyer.
That'll be interesting to see where that goes. All right, then it talks about the insurance. We covered that. What other insurance coverage may an employee continue? All coverage they had prior to.
Can I ask a question? I mean, this physician kind of very murky in my mind. If you have a health insurance that the state told you, these are the provider, then pick and choose one of those, isn't that kind of assumed to be approved?
Well, the process is, I get the original certification from my doctor. If the state challenges it, they can pay for their doctor to also see me, to see if they agree with my doctor. If their provider that they're paying for does not agree with my provider, that brings in the third option, which is supposed to be a provider that we both agreed on. And that third is final and binding. So you start out with your own doctor. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't very often see that original doctor certification challenge. Does anybody else here?
Well, then, that's
Yeah.
really what I have the question in my mind. If the doctor, how can you challenge that?
It happens. But anybody from Ely or Mankato or anywhere, Rochester, have you seen many FMLA certifications challenged?
No.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often, I don't think. That was the only experience I've ever had where it's been challenged.
Is there any other maybe alternative motive that we as a steward needed to know? Because the example you showed is what we, Dan and I are involved in.
Well, I think in that example, the doubting came forward, or the challenge came forward, I think, because they were angry at this employee for the amount of time he was missing. Do you think that's true, Dan?
Yeah, and then they denied the FMLA, and he didn't take action to get it. He didn't do it, he just said, oh, okay, fine, and then he kept getting sick, and then they hauled him in because he was taking too much sick leave, at which point he brought up, well, I used to have FMLA on this, like, then why didn't you, pursue it, you never have, let's face it, you don't get the perfect employee to work with.
Right.
There's always, they're always difficult,
It's a fact of steward work that the people you work with do not always act in their own best interest.
Right.
That's a fact. Now, it's not because they're trying to be difficult, it's because it's their life, and it's not easy. And you have to be compassionate and understanding and do your best. Sometimes you can't do anything.
Thank you, Andy. All right, 22 talks about what other insurance coverage may an employee continue. An employee may continue all coverage they had prior, we covered that. 23, may an employee choose not to retain health and dental coverage? Yes, they can choose not to retain, and then they'll be reinstated when they return to work. May an employee choose not to retain optional coverages? Yes, however, they may have the coverages reinstated upon return to work if the return to work is within the allotted 12 weeks. So there's some different rules based on your mainstream health and dental coverages based on some of those other coverages that you may have. On the next page, if an employee terminates employment during FMLA, may the employer recoup the cost of the premiums paid? That would be a yes. The employer may recover its share of health and dental insurance premiums paid during a period of unpaid FMLA qualifying leave from an employee if the employee fails to return for work for at least 30 calendar days after the leave, unless the employee does not return due to the continuation, recurrence, or onset of the serious health condition, or due to other circumstances beyond the employee's control. I'm not, yeah, some of these are examples that we've never seen, but, and then it goes into COBRA rights.
No, that one I know. The employee died, and so I worked with the spouse of the employee. I mean, he had to pay back stuff.
Oh. Okay.
Because, they were on FMLA and they died. So now what, they terminated their state service. So the state came back after him for the,
Well, if it was the same, if being on FMLA is the same, if he was on paid leave during that time and he died, why is it any different? You drop him dead.
Well, I guess I would ask, was the death continuation, recurrence, or, was it because of the serious health condition?
Well, if he died, it obviously was.
Well, he might got hit by a bus. I don't know. All right, now we're getting morbid. Let's keep going. So, under 26, what are an employee's COBRA rights in relation to an FMLA qualifying leave? As it relates to FMLA qualifying leave, the COBRA qualifying event is termination of employment or at the end of the leave, whichever comes first. Once the COBRA qualifying event occurs, the employee may choose to continue health and dental by paying the entire cost of coverage, even though the employee did not pay their share of the premium during the FMLA qualifying leave. So that clarifies again where COBRA kicks in. Talks about what an employee can do if they believe their rights under FMLA have been violated. And so as you go down, do employees earn, I'm looking at 31, sick and vacation accruals when they're on unpaid, and we all know that they don't, not when they're on unpaid. Are they allowed to earn holiday pay during their leave only if they are in paid status on their normal workday and after the holiday? We know that rule, right? Does worker comp leave count against an employee's FMLA leave entitlement? It can. FMLA qualifying leave and workers' compensation leave may run concurrently, provided the reason for the absence is due to a qualifying serious illness or injury, and the employer properly notifies the employee in writing that the leave will be counted as FMLA leave. And we have had that circumstance happen. Can an employer count missed overtime hours against the employee's FMLA entitlement? Yes, if an employee would normally be required to work overtime but is unable to do so because of FMLA, that limits his or her ability to work overtime, the hours which the employee would have been required to work may be counted against the employee's entitlement. So I don't think we have a lot of members who have regular overtime. Just a couple comments about ADA, and then I'll open it up and turn it over to Jamie and Andy. And again, the ADA is not something that you should try to know too much about or give too much direction in, because there's other folks that administer this that know a lot more about it and hold the responsibility. But I think one of the things you should know and be familiar with is the whole issue of accommodations. We've seen employers, we've seen agencies give accommodations under FMLA. We have had discussions about accommodations that they've worked with us on. Certainly, if you have somebody that has a disability and has documented it either through FMLA or ADA forms that some of the employers, some of the agencies use, then you really are talking about a formal process of reasonable accommodations. And the employee, usually we suggest to the employee that they should be talking to their provider about accommodations. And even somebody that may be going through a mental health struggle is seeing a therapist, hopefully, and those providers, those therapists are some of the people that can most, they're most versed in some of the tools, some of the problem-solving ways, some of the accommodations that people could look at in really helping them do their job with the disability or serious illness that they may carry. We've had a lot of good accommodations, grievances, or conversations, or we've certainly talked about the process in a lot of meet and confers. And there's just a myriad of accommodations. You've seen for people with depression, you might have seen somebody with one of those sun lamps at their desk. Or we certainly have accommodations, sometimes, like I said before, working at home. What are some other accommodations that you all might have seen used for either ADA or FMLA? Any examples from anybody?
Oh, you've got things like speech.
The dragon
deals
speak?
for computers and stuff like that, because they're not able to use the keyboard very much.
Sometimes it could be a reduced schedule leave, where you're working less hours. Did somebody?
I know someone who asked to be put in an area that had a lot less activity because they had ADHD or something like that, that meant that they felt they were very easily distracted and wanted to be in a simpler place.
I think, Norlene, are you there?
I'm here.
We went through a process in Mankato for a member that actually had a lot to do with vibrations and sound around his work area. Do you remember that, Norlene?
I do.
And I think I certainly learned a lot going through that. So we actually did come up with...
Unfortunately, he just retired on Friday.
On Friday? Wow. Well, fortunately for him. But I guess the main thing for me, and then I think I'll end my presentation unless there's any questions, is that this is not stuff that anybody should shy away from. If you've got questions, work with your business agent. We'll help you figure it out. But again, if a member comes to you and says, I need FMLA, if you see a member struggling with performance and you're concerned that maybe they've been acting kind of differently, or they've been missing a lot of work or something like that, find a strategic way, if there's a comfort level, of saying, if there's anything medically going on that you need to have processed or document, I can help you do that. Make sure you know what the process is in your agency, and if you don't, ask them to do a presentation at Meet and Confer. Because people still struggle with this stuff, even though it's been around since 1993. People still struggle with this. So we just want to be available to help them in any way we can.
Kathy?
Yeah,
Hi there.
hi.
It's Kathy in Rochester.
Hi, Kathy.
I'd like to point out, if anybody is interested, you can go to a website called the Job Accommodation website. It's searchable by disability, it's searchable by diagnosis, and it's something that I use in my work every day.
That is excellent. Job accommodations?
Job Accommodation Network, so it's, I think it's JAN.org, or it's askjan.org, but you can do a Google search for the Job Accommodation Network, it's a website.
Kathy, would you email that to me?
Probably not today.
No, it doesn't have to be today. It could be tomorrow
I
or
can
the.
email it to you. I usually do.
Okay, thanks for Ty.
And I'll share that with the other business agents.
Or I'll send it out to Kathy and we can, and Jamie, and we can send it around.
Just jot it down, Job Accommodation.
Oh, give me a break.
Thanks, Kathy.
I have a question for you.
Go.
So, my mother is in Arizona, and if she became ill and I needed to go to her, would that qualify under FMLA, or would she have to be living in my home?
She has, I believe, and let me look at this, maybe I should look at this before I say it. Under the contractual language for sick leave, parents have to live in your home. But I do not believe they have to under FMLA. I'm getting the shake yes from Ms. Ketter, so I must be saying something right.
No, don't point at me. 'Cause I'm
Yeah, I know. Let
She
me
says the
look in here
shakes.
and figure it out. Because I know I've been in the contract that 3 days of medical or sick leave that you can have for elder parents, they have to be living in your immediate household.
It was under sick leave, but it was like 2 days or something. It's a very short
If I have to take vacation leave to do that then?
No, if you're talking about FMLA, I think that FMLA would cover that elder parent even though they live in a different state.
I'm not sure about that.
But we're looking.
Seems to me that it's 24 hours for a parent. I don't think they necessarily have to be living with you, but you get 24 hours
That's
per
what it
year.
is. It's 24 hours.
Yeah, it's 24 hours as part of the sick, I think it's section 3 of the sick use policy. And it's in there under, different events.
Right, under the contract.
In the contract.
Yeah, but FMLA, I don't think has that restriction.
I guess
I thought that was the FMLA restriction, is that they had to live with you.
No, that's a sick leave.
Oh,
in the
That's the contract, yep.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
It's immediate household under the contract.
Yes.
That's
Page 150, next of kin, would that be?
No, I think that's still under the,
Yeah, I don't see anything in there where it says,
No, I think it's just a parent, and the definition of parent on 150.
because I would think like divorced people, if you were a parent, you would still be able to take it to take care of your kid, even if the kid was living with somebody else.
Yeah, 159.
that's right.
Just
159, Dan?
in the Q&A, it just lists a parent with a serious health condition.
There you go. So we believe the restrictions are in the contract, not under FMLA for parents,
So it might be.
for elder parents.
I'm good.
Say that again?
The contract has the benchmark of the elder parent living in your immediate household to use paid sick time, but FMLA is just parent. So we do not believe there's any restrictions like there are in the contract.
So if I wanted to, God forbid something happened, she's healthy as a horse, but if I needed to go, would I take vacation time, or would I
Well, you can't use sick time unless it's under the contract, the 24 hours, and then they do have to be in the immediate household. So you could either take unpaid FMLA or you could request to use vacation. But if it is FMLA, you better have something documented for the employer before you go.
Right.
The 24 hours, they don't have to live with you for sick leave.
Right, but if she's gonna fly out of state, it's gonna be for more than
Yeah,
24 hours.
but the contract language is where the benchmark is.
Sorry again, I'm hogging.
So, Andy, Jamie, where do we go from here?
Yeah, we get discussion going.
What experience have you guys had with this FMLA? Anybody represent anybody with an FMLA issue?
I'll start. One of the, I'm a chief steward, so I sit on the Employee Rights Committee, as do a few of other people here. One of the things that we see a lot there are people who get into trouble for their for not coming to work or for coming in late a lot, and it turns out that a lot of those people are suffering from depression. And that seems to be very common. But when you're suffering from depression, you're not going to go to the HR and tell them, I'm suffering from depression, I need to fill out FMLA. So it really becomes the job of the steward to kind of pull that out of them and say, what's going on? Is, as Kathy says, you ask, is this a medical condition? And then you say, well, you really ought to be filling out your FMLA papers. And they say, yeah, I know. And then you find out, yeah, I'll do that. And you find out a week later, well, have you done it? No, I really haven't. Because they're suffering from depression. They're gonna not do that. So you really have to hold them by the hand and take them up to HR and say, here's the person you need to work with, and here's the forms. You got to fill out these forms, or you're going to get fired. So it's really, really an important job.
And sometimes that makes an accommodation, is to adjust your shift for a certain amount of time until hopefully you're able to get some help, start some new meds that may work, whatever. I mean, we certainly have asked under accommodations for a different shift or for a later start. Teresa, what do you have?
Well, I was going to say that's one of my stock questions now. If I see somebody for the second time for the same issue, I say, what's changed? And if it's not a new supervisor, then I figure it's medical.
Yeah.
And I've even asked the supervisors, does this person have an FMLA? And they'll say, well, I can't tell. I said, I don't want to know what it is. I just want to know if there is one. And then I will take the employee and walk them up to HR, introduce them to the person who does the FMLA, and I'll say, okay, here you are, here they are.
That's
See you later.
perfect. You know who else is really, really good at working with employees with challenges, medical challenges, is EAP. And it's not the old EAP, which we used to think was kind of like the enemy or kind of a management department that just told our members that, this is what you have to do to fix it, it's your problem. The EAP completely redid themselves, and I mean, those of you up in Ely, you know the EAP. Todd Cole, I just talked to an employee, one of my members from Revenue, who didn't feel comfortable in telling me what was going on medically, but she's going to lose her job if she doesn't address it. Put her in touch with Todd Cole in the EAP. He's got her seeing a therapist. He's working with her with accommodations. The EAP, I think, is just, and Joni, you too can make, they're just rock solid and absolutely in the employee's corner nowadays. They're awesome.
Is that who you would recommend then, as far as for somebody that you think may be having a mental issue?
Yeah, I'm Todd Cole. I mean, I've dropped his name around the state a lot. He's awesome, right, Joni?
I think that both people that we've worked with there have been really good. So yeah, I would definitely start with EAP. And if it's something beyond what they feel comfortable dealing with, then they can refer them on to someone more suited to dealing with whatever their issues are.
Yeah, I have a hard time asking somebody if they have a mental health.
No, exactly. But they deal with all kinds of things, and that's why it's kind of good to send them there, because they deal with everything, not just mental health issues. They deal with financial issues, they deal with, you know,
But if you
everything,
can't get
right?
them to contact them, can you yourself contact EAP and ask them to
A
contact them?
supervisor can,
Supervisor can, yeah.
can set up an appointment and tell them that they have paid time to go to the appointment.
Okay.
A supervisor, I believe, can request that they go to see EAP.
What if the supervisor is too busy trying to get them fired?
Wow.
Then you send them to me, and then I go through my stuff and take them up to.
You know,
You ended up getting fired. and I know
If
that
you're
you-
comfortable enough, it's sometimes good to remind people that, you know, you can say, look, I've seen FMLA for all kinds of different issues, and give them some examples. Maybe, you know, people with mental health issues, a lot of them still feel pretty isolated, especially when they're in the workplace trying to hold down a job. So sometimes I've said to people, look, I've seen people do FMLA for anxiety, for depression, for bipolar, whatever it is. You know, this is confidential, this will protect you. I mean, if you can get used to a shtick that you're comfortable with, you really can get them to maybe open up a little bit and at least seek out the help from either the EAP or their own FMLA person in the agency.
Well, I was just going to say, this is kind of unrelated, but it's kind of something that I'm kind of working on. If a person starts to run out of their time, are they responsible for keeping, I mean, I suppose they're responsible for keeping track of that, but does HR help in that at all? Or if there was like tracking, like payroll or somebody like that?
I've seen it a couple different ways. I've seen letters from HR and I've seen emails from payroll. What about you guys? What have you seen?
It's on your pay stub, on your vacation leave. It says
Okay.
accruals. It has, if you have FMLA, it has it on there every pay period.
So then when you're running low, you should be able to check your semaphore or whatever it is to see whether it is or, okay.
The other thing I was going to say is that we get along really well with our, like I said, with our HR. We meet with them once a month about grievances and what's going on, and I've actually had HR personnel not tell me things, but allude to things, because I can say things that they can't say. And so we've tried to work together to prevent people from getting fired by giving them, and we actually had a woman who was going to get fired, and we worked together, and HR or somebody filled out the Social Security papers for her so she could get Social Security disability and retirement disability.
That's fantastic. You know, you might even work with members who really do need to look at taking a medical leave.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes before they get terminated, you know? And that's a lot of times hard because they've usually exhausted their sick leave. So, you know, economically, it's not the easiest, but neither is losing your job and then trying to fight that battle. So I always try and review the medical leave. Not a lot of members understand they have up to a year where their job would be saved. Anything else from Rochester, Ely, or Mankato?
No, we're perfect.
Well, we're going to vote on that. You know, the other thing just to mention, certainly that we've seen, and I'm thinking about Ely, anytime you even hear anything kind of hinky, check it out with us. We had a situation where a supervisor was contacting your doctor without your permission.
Yeah.
And actually what that does is it puts the doctor in a situation where if they answered, certainly with any meaningful answer, they would be in violation of HIPAA.
Where did the supervisor get the doctor's name?
Off of forms that had been turned into HR. It wasn't the supervisor, it was a higher up manager. Which she shouldn't have been, we had many meetings about this, and as far as we know, it will never happen again, but of course, we have to babysit that, but, yeah, I mean, you do find some communications that are kind of troubling.
Hey, I have a question in Winona.
Go for it.
So can you give me some examples or instances when ADA and FMLA would be, like, there'd be times when you want to make sure you think of ADA when somebody's on FMLA? Are there instances where you should make sure you're thinking of it or occurrences? I'm not sure what
Well, I mean, we're certainly not providers, so we should never try and step into that mode. But after you kind of work with FMLA issues, you begin to be able to certainly identify which ones may lend itself to an actual disability. You know, I mean, diabetes may be an FMLA qualifying event, but it typically, if you have it under control, won't lead to any disabilities or anything that would be longer lasting. So to me, it's just kind of the diagnosis that you begin to understand attaches itself to the possibility of a disability. Any other comments on that, Joni?
I think if you're ever thinking about the Americans with Disabilities Act, you should actually go and look at the act, because it does a really nice job of describing what is and is not considered a disability. And I think that that would give you a much clearer idea as to whether you should be looking at some sort of an accommodation under the act.
That's great advice. And again, I think that in working with the agencies, we've seen accommodations being given to FMLA. We've seen accommodations being given to a possible ADA issue without a lot of further paperwork filled out. So, you know, again, a lot of the agencies tend to become really nervous, so they're very flexible and very willing to work with employees where certainly on a different setting they wouldn't be as flexible or giving them as many choices.
I might add something to that thought about diabetes, if I may.
Sure.
Because I work in home rehab, I see a lot of variations on symptoms from diabetes. I've got somebody who is a brutal diabetic, and the only way he can type 1 diabetes, the only way he can control his health issues is with a split shift. So he's had to ask for that. So like, for instance, he can go in from 8 to 11 in the morning, and then he's got to go have a lunch and go work out strenuously, and then go back for a 2 to 5:30 sort of a shift. You can control it with diet, you can control it with medication, and then there are those folks that even though it's quote under control, unquote, may have cognitive issues because they're having fatigue, or they kind of get a little foggy, or their mood can go south, and it can be related to blood sugar. So even though it sounds like something that can be controlled with medication may not need accommodation, don't rush to judging that.
Yeah.
We're not in a position as stewards or chief stews to kind of rush to judgment on
That's right.
whether somebody needs an accommodation or not. But please keep in mind that a lot of different things can cause a lot of different things. A simple little car accident, where you get bumped, you get rear-ended in the parking lot or whatever, and the next thing you know, somebody's had a mild concussion and they're having memory issues and it's creating problems at work, and you never know what's going to happen. So if in doubt, whenever you're in doubt, ask those questions. How are you doing? What's different with your life? You have a medical condition that has changed something.
I think those are really good questions to ask.
I think if that was kind of my comment too, the person I'm thinking of who's wanting to maybe look at ADA as well as FMLA is a diabetic, and he's giving me some reasons as to why. So when you said diabetes, no, I'm thinking, well, I'm not sure that exactly answers my question there. So,
Right. Well, I did say well maintained, or that you got it under control. So, but even if you talk about allergy or asthma, I mean, we're not providers. So we never want to put ourselves in the situation where we're giving advice based on a diagnosis or how bad, or only the doctor can do that. Because you look at asthma, and there's certainly a large gambit of levels of how serious that can be, so. All right, I think that's it, unless,
Any more comments or questions?
We certainly want to thank you, Kathy.
Thanks, Kathy.